The Pelagos 39, I've had it for about 2 months now, and it's changed my thought process on dive watches and what I like about them, so let's get into it. Tudor has had release after release after release this year, and I think it's mainly just to stay in the limelight. As soon as one dies down, then they go, hey, wait, hold on, I've got a whole other watch for you guys to pay attention to. And this is the quickest release to purchase that I have ever experienced, and it was worth it for me. I've done a review already talking about the watch, but 2 months later, I've got a few more thoughts about it, a few more experiences. There's a lot of differences between wanting a watch for a set of specifications and then experiencing it and how that feeling is over an extended period of time. The wearing experience, the day-to-day, is what I think is the important part of it. How well does it scratch? Or how little does it scratch? How's that clasp actually feel over time? Is the clasp too wide? How much adjustment can you actually get out of that clasp? Is the titanium too light? Is the ceramic too noticeable? Those are the sorts of things that are outside of the specs that you kind of notice and pay attention to over the course of 2 months. So scratch resistance on the titanium is kind of a difficult topic. So yes, it scratches easier than stainless steel that you see in watches, both 316L and 904L stainless steel, because this is a grade 2 titanium. Grade 5 titanium is supposed to scratch less often than those stainless steels, but that's not this watch. So because it scratches a little bit more often, how often is that actually noticed? And how much does it scratch in reality? And for me, I notice that it scratches about the same as my stainless steel watches. Now that's obviously my anecdotal evidence. The difference is going to be, it's kind of a weird situation. So when I scratch it, I feel like it's more noticeable to me because the metal is darker. And so I immediately are more prone to seeing that there is a scratch there, whereas a stainless steel watch, you know, the whole thing is already a shiny object. And so I don't have those same divots that are reflecting light at me as often, or I don't notice them as often. And so those scratches tend to blend in a little bit more. One of the strange things is that some scratches are light enough that when the titanium oxidizes, because it oxidizes almost immediately after, it actually becomes a little darker again. And so I find it sometimes a little less noticeable than other scratches. That being said, the scratches are more noticeable for me on this kind of watch than on a steel watch. So that's kind of difficult to explain, but that's generally how I feel about the scratches. The bracelet clasp is one of the key things that people have asked me about, and it's a wider clasp. I've got the specs of the clasp on there as well as the range of the extension on there. Now the range on the extension is such a minor point because if you need that much range of extension on your wrist, you're having some serious swelling of your wrist. Like you're running a marathon to the point where all your extremities are super swollen. I mean, you're not gonna need that much range, but it's nice because it helps you fine tune in exactly where this fits on your wrist. So I do adjust it occasionally. I find that where I've got it now, I tend to leave it at more than anything, but having that adjustability is actually quite nice. All my other watches that are on bracelets, I wish had this adjustment, so that's a really cool benefit, and I really enjoy it. The clasp is not too tall, in my opinion. It's nice and narrow, and it is long, like because of the diver extension going beyond the clasp and the clasp itself being relatively long, there's a whole lot of presence there that's of the bracelet clasp, but it doesn't bother me. It's positioned well on my wrist. It's actually straight on where I would want it on the flat part of the bottom of my wrist. Whereas most other clasps that I've experienced, sometimes they want to favor one side or the other. And that has to do with how many actual links I can take out because I have smaller wrists. This clasp actually positions perfectly where I would want it, so it's a non-issue for me. And I would say that depends for you, how big is your wrist, how many links can you take out? For example, in my case, I'm done with links I can take out on the bottom side, underneath the Pelagos side, the closer to me side. And because I'm running out of links there, if someone had a smaller wrist, what you're gonna end up with is that clasp is gonna start favoring the other side where you still have links that you can take out. And because it would start favoring that side, it may not sit perfectly positioned as it does on my wrist. And that would be a potential downside. If it starts favoring, you might start noticing the difference of how big that clasp is. Is titanium too light? Common question people have had for me wearing this watch. I like light watches. I'm the wrong person to ask. If I'm supposed to be someone who likes heavy watches, or if I was someone who likes heavy watches, then maybe this watch wouldn't be for me, but I love a light wearing experience. I like that I can toss this on a rubber strap and it feels like wearing my G-Shock. I love I can toss it back on a bracelet and it feels like the hollow links on my Explorer or even my Explorer 2 in terms of the bracelet. It's a very light package, and so I forget about it. And so from what I like in a watch, it's perfect. I tend to buy a watch for the look and the design, but I keep it for its wearability. And this is wearability in spades. The bezel is light, so when it reflects, it's not gonna be a bright, shimmery, glossy type finish like it is on the Submariner, for example. In this case, it's gonna basically ghost it out. So when the light hits it and it reflects, it kind of fades out that dial. You lose the ability to read the numbers quite that well, but it makes it nice and kind of gray, and I love it. I have to say, of all the things about this watch, the specs, the dial look, the indice layout, the fact that it squares, the snowflake hands, of everything on the entire watch, my favorite part of this watch is the bezel. I love that it ghosts out when the watch is hit with direct sunlight. I love that I'm driving and I see a matte black, what looks like a matte black dial to me on my wrist, with then a bezel that has ghosted out and has really lightened in comparison. And that is by far the part that has kept this watch on my wrist, is the fact that it looks so freaking cool. I love this bezel. I know some people didn't like it when the press release came out, but I love it. The dial sunburst texture over 2 months, I've never noticed it. I don't see it ever. Take that for what it is. I'm not really gonna comment on it more than that. I don't ever see it. So it looks like a matte, slightly glossy satin finish dial, and that's good enough for me. There are other 2 points I've heard about the bezel. So one is that the bezel gets knocked off. I've seen pictures of people showing bezels getting knocked off, and I think that's all dive watches. If you get it hit on the right angle, the bezel itself can come off, and you just pop it right back on. If you don't feel comfortable popping it back on, a watchmaker could do it pretty easily. It's generally easy to do that on dive watches, especially on something like this, because the bezel overhangs the case. And so while the case itself is 39 millimeters, the bezel is actually more like 40. It ends up being able to create this lip that can help you knock off that bezel on accident. So I've seen people do that and kind of complain about it, but that's most dive watches in my experience. The bezel action is something other people have complained about as well. And I think that just depends. So every dive watch that I've handled has the different bezel action. So some of them, you hold the sides and you kind of turn it. Others, you kind of press down from above and then turn it. And this is the down turn variant. My Seiko Turtle, for example, I can just turn, or most Seikos, I can just turn from the outside and I don't feel the difference. This watch, I have to push down and then actually rotate the bezel, and then the bezel action's perfect. If I just try and rotate it sideways, then I get a lot more resistance, and if I don't put enough pressure downward, if I'm just trying to turn it sideways, it can get caught. It can kind of like try and not actually move. And so if that's the bezel action anger or upsetness that people have, then I would just tell you, just push down and then rotate it. I had the same sort of bezel action on my Black Bay 58 that I used to own as well. I could never turn it from the side. I always had to press down and then turn it. So if that's your complaint, I would say just change the way that you turn the bezel. If you don't like that you have to push down to turn it, then I guess get another watch. This isn't the right one for you. So why has it changed my opinion on dive watches? I've never been a huge dive watch guy. I mean, I really liked the look of them, but every time I've owned one, I sell it. It doesn't stay. And I think it's because I like either really simple dials, like an Explorer, where there's very little going on, or a dress watch. There's almost nothing there, and it's beautiful in its simplicity. Or I like chronographs, where it's just like busy. There's a lot going on, and it looks really well proportioned. This is fucking perfect. I mean, I don't really have an idea of what other things I could ask for in a dive watch that I would want. The indice proportion compared to the dial is spot on, because the old Rolex Submariners, I think the indices are a little too small, and the new ones I think are a little too big. And so this is perfect for that. The actual dial text layout, the handset, the indice type, everything about this watch for me is the perfect dive watch. And so people are obviously raving about it, but obviously other people are angry and don't like it because it seems too perfect. And I would say, chill out. If it's too perfect for you, then don't get it. But I think it is that perfect dive watch. This is the one that I think I will never get rid of. And I said that in the video when it first got released, and I didn't really believe it because I wanted to experience it. but I really have changed my mind on dive watches. I really like this design. It doesn't make me want to buy other ones. It just makes me understand why people love dive watches so much. They're just really functional and really fun. And when you get that perfect proportional dial layout to bezel layout, and especially with this ghost bezel, it's just perfect. I love it. So that's my 2 months with the Tudor Pelagos 39, just talking generally about things people have complained about and some of my experiences. Let me know any other questions you have down below, and maybe I'll have another video to follow up with this one. Do me a favor and subscribe. Like this video if you like stuff like this. Give me a follow on Instagram as well. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.